Hello, hello, everyone. I want to talk to you guys about something that is of great interest to me and should be of great interest to everyone. Unfortunately, that is not the case at all. But I would like to talk to you guys about the dramatic shift towards societal hell and societal destruction. Now, what do I mean by societal hell and destruction? What I mean by that is the complete and utter tolerance of the diabolical, of really the abominable, and of evil. The acceptance, the acceptance and tolerance can be seen as light words. Maybe I should use stronger words. The enthusiastic embracing of the sinister, the despotic ways of the diabolical, the utter oppression of the helpless, the murder of the helpless, the enslavement of the righteous, and the praise of all things antichrist and completely egregious. Now, I want to give you guys a number of examples as to what I'm talking about. This is a very, very fascinating subject, as dark as it is, but nonetheless, it is a fascinating subject because it gives us an idea as to how societies and communities shift in cycles. And I've talked about this a number of times. I believe that human history flows like cycles, like the water cycle. You know, rain comes down, and then the sun comes out, and then you have evaporation, and H2O goes back into the sky. And if it gets too cold, the water can come down as hail or as snow. But there is a cycle nonetheless, regardless of the various variances of it. It's still a cycle. And so human society also goes through cycles. I think we begin good, and then we go into degeneracy because we become way, way, way too comfortable, and we become too happy, and we think, well, you know, we're going down the right way. Might as well just do what we want and have a good time and have fun. So we go down to degeneracy, and then from there we begin to embrace sadism. We begin to embrace cruelty. We see cruelty as a virtue. We see backstabbing as a virtue. If we can backstab our neighbor, we consider it winning. If we can kill other people, we consider it domination. If we can rule over others, we consider it superiority and a demonstration of the efficacy of our willpower. This, my friends, is the epitome of human evil, which ultimately originates all from pride. All sin comes from pride. All sin is rooted in pride. The very astute French philosopher Joseph de Maistre, whose work I love. I've read, I think, I want to say all of his books, but I may have missed a few. I don't know, but I recommend that everyone read the writings of Joseph de Maistre. His works on human society and philosophy and religion, I think, are absolutely enriching to the mind and to the intellect, and I encourage all of you guys to read him. But Joseph de Maistre spoke about the degeneracy of French society. You see, Joseph de Maistre lived before the French Revolution. He was old enough by the time of the French Revolution to remember Baroque music, because by the time the French Revolution popped up, Baroque music was beginning to dissipate and get eclipsed by classical music. Well, I shouldn't say that, actually. Classical music was already there, so I think Baroque music had already been eclipsed. But to correct myself, Baroque music was being eclipsed more so by the Romantic era. So basically, the music of musicians like Beethoven. But yes, Baroque music was almost becoming non-existent, and Romantic music was becoming the dominating force of music by this time. And so Maistre was old enough to remember the days of Baroque music and how Baroque music was the mainstream form of music in his younger days, and he reminisced about that, and he missed that, and he loved Baroque music, and he talked about how music was declining and how it was really going downhill in terms of style. The concepts of beauty was being lost. And he talks about how the moral standards of the society were disintegrating, and he says some very interesting things. He observes how in France it came to the point where if a man had sex with another man's wife, he was considered to be a winner. I won. And he uses this as an example as to what French society had become. So humanity goes down into degeneracy, and then from there we begin to embrace backstabbing, and we begin to embrace cruelty and sadism. A great example of this in regards to the 18th century was the writings of Marquis de Sade. The term sadism comes from the name Sade, because the Marquis de Sade was a supporter of the French Revolution, but he also wrote many books on sadomasochism and the glories of sadism. And his works truly were a reflection of the zeitgeist of the day. They were a reflection of the spirit of the age, or really I should say the demon of the age, because the sadism of the French Revolution was one thing that he supported, and his love of sadism truly demonstrated how the rebels were not just fighting for the destruction of monarchy and for church, but at the same time they were fighting for the supremacy of sadism, the supremacy of cruelty and evil. Now, let me just say that we can continuously see this in human history, this state of goodness declining into a state of degeneracy, and from there we go into a state of savagery. And in the state of savagery, we have wars and massacres and genocides, and we begin to murder and butcher each other. We see this in the Bible. Mankind begins in the Garden of Eden. Mankind lives in peace, perfect peace. And then mankind gets a little too comfortable, and Adam says, why the hell not? He eats the fruit, he rebels, and then you begin to see the decline into savagery. So Adam and Eve begin in harmony. They go into degeneracy, which is rebellion. They both rebel. And then mankind goes into savagery, which is seen in the murder of Abel by Cain. And then the Bible begins to describe how the descendants of Cain were murderous, and they were also polygamous as well. So, the Bible gives us this great illustration as to this reality of human existence. You can also make this observation in the Middle East. You can make this observation anywhere, but I want to use the Middle East as a particular example. So, for example, in the Middle East at one point in time, really after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the Middle East decided that it didn't really want to go into the savagery of Islamic fundamentalism, nor into the savagery of the nationalism which was exemplified by the Young Turk regime in the last years of the Ottoman Empire, because the people who orchestrated the Armenian genocide during the First World War were social Darwinist, racist, and nationalist, and they actually hated God and they hated religion. They used Muslim fanatics to do the killing, but nonetheless, they, the orchestrators, did not believe in religion. In fact, they hated religion. They hated God, and they hated all things holy. So the Middle East decided we don't want to do those things anymore, and for a long time, the Middle East was in, more or less, generally speaking, in a state of peace. A lot of this stuff began to really end and go back into violence and radicalism in the late 1970s, and it really got worse from there. In the 1980s, we saw horrific things like the massacres of Sabra and Shatila, in which the Lebanese fascist phalangists butchered around 1,000 civilians living in refugee camps in Lebanon. And we also saw other massacres as well. The massacre of Damour, in which Palestinian nationalists butchered Lebanese Christians in the neighborhood of Damour, and we also saw the things like the massacre of Palestinians also in the camp of Sabra by Amal. Amal were fanatical Shiite militias who helped to inspire the Iranian Revolution, actually. But there was horrific savagery done in that dark epoch of Lebanon's history. And there was something else. There was another phenomena that began to be witnessed in Lebanon beginning in the 1980s, and that was the phenomena of suicide bombing, which was something almost unheard of in the Middle East at this point, especially in Lebanon, where people liked to party and enjoy life. And so the idea of people blowing themselves up was kind of shocking, really. But again, Lebanon was in a state of degeneracy, and from degeneracy, it went into a state of savagery. So there is a story of a woman. This was in the 1980s. Her name was Ibtisam Harb. Ibtisam Harb. She was believe it or not, she was a Syrian National Socialist. She was a Nazi. She got into a car and she drove into the base of SLA soldiers. The SLA was the South Lebanon Army. They were essentially an Israeli-backed militia. And the Islamists and the nationalists hated them because they were being backed by Israel. And there arose a group called the Syrian National Socialists. Their official name was Syrian Social Nationalist Party. Social Nationalist is National Socialist. It's kind of like that group in Ukraine that was a precursor to the Azov Nazi battalion. They called themselves the Social National Ukrainian People's Party or something like that. But they use that same reverse of the words. It's not National Socialist. We're the Social Nationalists. Well, it's just a play on words. It's the same exact thing. But these people, the Syrian Social Nationalists, they are Nazis and they still exist. If you look at their emblem, their icon, it's essentially a swastika. It's a circular swastika. Kind of reminds me of some of the stuff you see being used by Japanese nationalists. But this woman got into a car. She drove right into an SLA base. The car blew up, and she ended up murdering 15 people. 2 of them were SLA soldiers. And this was something that was almost unheard of. Suicide bombing became very, very real in Lebanon in the 1980s. It's what happened to the Marine barracks in Lebanon. Over 200 Marines were massacred by a suicide bomber. So suicide bombing became a part of the war. It became a part of Islamic Jihad, but not just that, but also it became a part of the nationalist movements as well. So you see this sort of thing happening in the Middle East, where you have Islamic fundamentalism, Shiite fanaticism, and also National Socialist fanaticism as well. Islamic Nazis, really, or really secular Nazis as well. Hardcore nationalists willing to butcher for their cause of race and state and nation statehood and all that stuff. It's what happened when the Phalangists butchered all those Palestinians. It had nothing to do with religion, and it had everything to do with racism. But Robert Fisk, the British journalist for the London Times, he talks about how suicide bombing was something very, very new at the time. And so these various suicide bombing attacks, be it what I just read to you, or the Marine barracks, or the bombing of the French military base that happened right before the bombing of the Marine barracks, all these things were done by suicide bombings, and suicide bombing was very new. But nonetheless, it marked a new phenomena, and it also was a new aspect for a transition towards a new era, a new zeitgeist. And now, when we talk about suicide bombing, it's like no one's shocked by it. Why? Because it has become a part of reality. It's become a we have become accustomed to it, in other words. So this is an example of the world entering a new era. And every time we enter a new era, it always consists of its darknesses and its evils. And I think we obviously are entering a new era, but it's not going to be something we've already entered it with the advent of coronavirus and all that. But the coronavirus and all the effects of coronavirus marks a new zeitgeist. It marks a new era. And it's going to entail new evils, or really just old evils that are revived. But I began to see this transition in 2017, 2014, 2015. I saw the transition. I saw the world transitioning into something new. When I saw, for example, how the conservatives of both North America and Western Europe were praising Milo Yiannopoulos, an operative who has spoken very highly of pederasty, man-boy love. When I saw how Dennis Prager, a famous conservative right-wing radio host in the United States, when I saw how he, on the David Rubin show, stated that the Bible says that you can have pleasure with young boys just as you can with young girls. And then he says, I'm not talking 9-year-olds, 15-year-olds. When I saw Prager implicitly, and to a great extent, I mean, really explicitly, speaking lightly of pederasty and stating that the Bible says that you can enjoy pederasty.
You're in my home studio. You're in my home. I live here with a man.
I am as comfortable with these two couples as with heterosexual couples.
And by the way, for the record, right before we started, you asked me if I was married. You didn't know if I was straight or gay, and I didn't sense that you cared.
Right, and then my immediate concern was, how did you meet?
Yeah,
I want to hear your romance. Right. I'm as interested as if it was a woman. Well, I assume you'd rather be on a political channel than a gay channel.
Yeah.
You're not defined by your gayness.
This is as gay as it gets.
Yes. Normal is not defined by your sexual orientation.
Yeah.
That's what normal. I'm not saying heterosexual is more normal. By the way, I actually believe bisexual is the norm. The Bible said, men, you are as happy with boys. I don't mean 8-year-olds, 15-year-olds.
Yeah.
Just as a grown man is happy with a 15-year-old girl.
Mm-hmm.
But in that sense, homosexuals and heterosexuals are identical.
When I saw Prager say those things, and the fact that so many people watched that interview, but I was the only one to say, well, there's something wrong with what this guy just said, leads me to believe, and it led me to conclude and to affirm and to recognize that we are truly entering a new era of the diabolical. We are entering a new era of the diabolical. It's very, very real. And if you think what's been happening or what happened in the last 5 years or so was surprising, and if you think 2020 was bad, this decade is going to hold many, many dark surprises. Many dark surprises. So that is my thoughts for tonight. I haven't done a live feed since New Year's Eve, but I decided to do this video as a pre-recording because I just wanted to get these thoughts out, and but nonetheless, I will continue to do live feeds. So I will be doing a live feed tomorrow with my father. Don't forget to tune in. It'll be at 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern, and 6 p.m. Pacific Time. Anyway, these are my thoughts. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.